Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is looking at delivering group work at school and at home using G Suite, using Google for Education. Welcome. This is one of a series of webinars we're delivering, focusing on hybrid learning. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. Just a quick run through what we're going to cover today. We're going to take you through, talk about group work and why group work is important to start with. Then we're going to focus in on some of the Google tools. So we're going to focus in on Jamboard with Mia. And then Stephen's going to take us through different ways of delivering breakout rooms. And finally, then we'll open up to questions and answers. So during today's webinar, if at any time you've got any questions, feel free, if you're watching live, to pop them in the chat over on the right-hand side there. And we'll either respond as the call goes on, or at the end of the call, we've got a time slot where we'll jump to any questions across any of the Google tools that we're talking about or using today. So just to introduce myself, my name's Andy Caffrey. I'm a Google Certified Innovator and Google Certified Trainer, and I work here in the UK for Canopy. I'm joined today by Mia, who's also a Certified Trainer from Greater Brighton Metropolitan College, and also Stephen Hope later in the call from the Illuminate Education Group up in Leeds. And so Mia and Steve are going to take us through some of the tools as we get into some of the meat of today's webinar. To start off with them, just a reminder that this is one of a series of webinars. So each week on a Tuesday, you can join us at 3:30 for a webinar focused around hybrid learning. And right now is a really challenging time for teachers, and it's important that we recognise that. Some teachers will have students in school at the same time as trying to teach students at home. And that's a really difficult situation to be in when you've got this mixture of students and this hybrid learning that we're trying to deliver. And so we're trying to focus these webinars to provide support for the times we're facing. Everything we talk about today, all of the slides and all the resources that we mentioned, plus all the resources and the videos from the previous sessions in this series are all available on the web at canopy.click/hybrid. So you can go over there and watch any of the previous webinars. If you want to use the slides from today's session in some training you're delivering yourself in school, or access any of the links we talk about, feel free to pop over to our support site and download them from there. So it's all available online at canopy.click/hybrid. So to get into today's webinar, then we're going to really focus on this idea of delivering group work for students while we're online. And I want to start off really much by talking about that, because when we first moved back in March to distance learning and to online learning, there was that temptation initially to focus on teacher-student interaction. But we know that group work can be really beneficial to students. And I think a lot of us, when we're delivering work in the classroom, often will deliver group work-based projects and will deliver group work with students. And lots of research talks about the importance of that. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I like to often reference the work of the Education Endowment Foundation, because they go out and they study a range of different papers that are available out there to look at the impacts that different strategies can have. And collaborative learning, which effectively is group work, is right up there in one of their sort of top 6 strategies to use as a teacher. And as you can see there, for moderately low cost, the time that it would take you to put people into groups, it can have an impact on students based on a range of evidence that they've collected. So we know that collaborative learning is important. I think any of us that are teaching in the classroom understand the power of doing collaborative learning with students. So I think we all get that. What we're trying to focus on today is there is a worry that as we move towards distance learning, people move away from that style of learning. So what they say in terms of their research from the Education Endowment Foundation is that it has a positive impact, and that impact can be greater if we get the task right. So it's not just about sitting pupils together, or in the case of today, getting them connected together, but how will you redefine the tasks that we're doing with students to enable that structured approach to work. And Mia's going to talk about using Jamboard in the first part of the call today. And really focus on some of those approaches that you can take to deliver that learning. So we know that collaborative learning is important. What we then need to work on is how can we deliver that, because there is that temptation, particularly if we're delivering hybrid. So we've got some students in school and some students at home. There's therefore that challenge of how do we do group work in that situation? But there are a range of tools out there that can allow students to partake in their learning and collaborate with other students as that learning is taking place. And that's really what today's webinar is focused on. So I hope that sets the scene. I'm going to introduce Mia on now. Hi, Mia. When she joins us.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Mia. And you're going to just start off by taking us through Jamboard. So we'll let you share your screen in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. So my name is Mia and I'm a learning technologist in FE and also a Google certified trainer. And today I'm going to be talking about how you can use Jamboard to promote collaborative learning in a few different ways. So Jamboard is one of the core G Suite for Education apps and is really simple to use. It's one of my favourite tools because it's super versatile and suitable for all ages, from primary school right up to FE and beyond. So in the college where I work, we're using it a lot at the moment for a range of hybrid activities, both synchronous and asynchronous as well. So before I get started showing you some different ways that you can set it up for group work, I just want to give you a really quick introduction to the different tools that you can use within Jamboard, just in case there's anyone watching today that hasn't seen it before. So on my screen here, I've gone to jamboard.google.com, and to create a new Jamboard, I'm just going to click the plus button in the bottom right hand corner here. And that's opened a new Jam for me. So everything that you will need is on the left-hand side, basically. And I'll just go through each of these tools really quickly. So at the top here, we have got the pen tool. You've got a range of different styles and colors so that you can draw diagrams and write things on your Jam. Next, we've got the erase tool. We've got the cursor or the select tool, which allows you to move things around on the page, resize them and rotate them. And then next we've got sticky notes, which is probably my favorite part of using Jamboard. When I was teaching, I used to love doing sticky note exercises in the classroom, and it's really great that we can now do this completely digitally. So I'm just going to click on a sticky note. And you can pop that in the corner as a prompt for students to respond to with their own sticky notes. Next, we're able to add images, and we can add these from multiple different places. So you can upload them from your computer. You can find an image with Google search, or you could add images from your Google Drive or your Google Photos. So I'm just going to pop a cute picture of a cat in there. And then we have got a couple of new things that have come about in the last few months. So we've got the option to draw shapes. So you've got a few different shapes there. You just draw them on the page, and then you can recolor those. There's the option for text box. So this is really great that this has been added to Jamboard recently, because now you don't need to rely on the sticky notes for typing. You can just type straight into a text box on the page. Oh. Let's try that again. And then finally, down the bottom here, there's a laser tool. So you can highlight particular things on the page if you're presenting this to your students, and it will just draw a red circle or a red underline temporarily for you to show to your class. And then a couple of things at the top here, you've got the option to change the background. You can change it to a lined background, square, or you might want to change that to a different color, which will make things a bit more accessible to certain students. And then at the top here, you can add more frames. So you could have a different activity on each of these frames, or something that I'm going to show you shortly is you could set up these frames to have a different activity for different groups within the same Jamboard. So that's just a little overview of how Jamboard works. Although I'm working in FE now, my teaching background is actually primary. So I've set up a few examples to show you today of how I would use Jamboard when teaching computing. So many of these example activities that I've set up here are group activities that I would normally do in the classroom with real sticky notes or cutouts which students could physically move around on their tables, which in computing is what we call unplugged computing. But what Jamboard allows me to do is do this completely digitally. So the students who may be at home self-isolating could join in. And there's also no worry that lots of students are touching the same resources if they're in the physical classroom working on these group tasks. So first of all, I've set all of these up in Google Classroom because Google Classroom is a great space to just put everything so that it's really easy for students to find. What I would do is I would make sure that my students who are both in the classroom and at home know that Google Classroom is the first place for them to go at the start of the lesson so that they can get to the activities that I've set for them. So the activities that I've set up here are all slightly different. They've been set up in different ways for different types of group tasks. But in Classroom, I've set them all up as assignments, and this is so that I can set the sharing settings how I need to really easily through Classroom. So firstly, the first one here is a starter activity. So the idea of this activity is I would like students to add a sticky note just to tell me what they think that this piece of code will do. This means that all of the students are collaborating on the same task and putting their ideas in the same space. And this opens up a really nice opportunity for discussion in the classroom. So I'm just going to show you how I've set this up in Classroom by going in to edit this assignment. So as you can see, I've attached a Google Jamboard here, which I've set up in advance. And all I've done to add this is I've gone to Add from Google Drive because I've already created it. And it's here in my recent files. So I would click on that and insert that into my assignment. So as I said, the reason I've used assignments is so that I can easily set the sharing settings to what I need them to be. And you've got a few different options here, but because this is a collaborative activity, I've set it so that students can edit the file. So all of the students in my class are able to access that Jamboard and put their responses on at the same time in a synchronous way. So of course, a lot of us are working in a hybrid way at the moment, and that might mean that there are some students in the classroom and there are also some students joining from home via Google Meet. So there's just a couple of things that I want to highlight that I would also do just to make this slightly easier for those students at home. So I'm just going to open the Google Meet from up here that's attached to this classroom. And so recently there has been the new update to Meet, which allows for Jamboard integration. And so even though I'll be asking my students all to go to Classroom at the start of the lesson to find what they need at the beginning, what I would say is I would also put the Jamboard that I want them to work on into the Google Meet as well, just in case any of them aren't sure what they're supposed to be working on. Just makes it a bit easier for those students who aren't in the room and who might be feeling a little bit confused. So now that we've got this integration, I can click on Open a Jam. And again, as I've already created this in advance, I just click Choose from Drive. I select the jam and click on Open Jam. And what this does is this opens the Jamboard in a new window for me, which you can see there. And then it also posts the link into the Google Meet chat. So any students who are joining from home via Google Meet will be able to click on that link directly to get to the activity. And that opens up in a new tab. The second thing I would do, just to make it really clear and make sure that the students at home are having an equitable experience to those in the classroom, is I would also just present that Jamboard to my Google Meet screen. So I'm just going to choose a Chrome tab, select that Jamboard and share. And so if I just pin my presentation screen there, this is what my students at home will see. So even if the Jamboard is up on the whiteboard at the front of my physical classroom, it's also there on the screen, ready for when my students are finished with their task and they might want to go back to the Google Meet if they need to ask questions or anything. So that's one way of setting up Google Jamboard for a whole class collaborative activity. Now, one question that I get a lot around this is, how do you know what students have written, whose response is whose? And the simple answer to that is you don't know. So what I always suggest to the teachers that I work with is make it clear to the students at the start of the activity to just pop their initials at the end of their response on their sticky note, so that you can get a quick overview of whose sticky note is whose. Okay, so the next two examples that I have are more looking at group work for small groups rather than as the whole class. So this second activity that I've got set up here is a research activity. And earlier on, when I was showing you how to use Jamboard, I demonstrated that you can set up different frames in Jamboard which have different things on them. So for this activity, what I've done is I've put a different sticky note on each frame for each different group, and each different group has a different question to answer. So I've got 4 different pages here. So going back to my classroom, if we just have a look in the assignment, again, the same as before, I have set this up so students can edit the files. So my whole class are going to be editing the same Jamboard. But in this instance, I would set up some groups in advance, assign them a different frame to be working on. And the benefit of this is this can be done as an asynchronous activity, as homework that they work on across the week, or it could be a synchronous activity as well. But what's really great is the students who are in class and the students who are at home can add to this at whatever time suits them, basically. And even though they're probably doing the research independently in an asynchronous way, what they're doing is they're building on each other's work at a time which suits them. They're collaborating to create a resource that the whole class can refer to. So if I was a student working on the question for group 1, when I'm finished doing my research, I might want to have a quick flick through to see what the other groups have been working on, and learn about the different terms that they've been learning about. So it's a really great way to create a whole class resource, but have different groups working on different things. So the final activity that I've got set up here, again, is a small group activity. So the idea of this one is around planning a piece of code in advance. So I would want them to drag these blocks into an order and then add some sticky notes to tell me why they've done that, basically. So this would most likely, I would use this as a synchronous activity because it probably involves a little bit more communication between the groups, so that they're not replicating work, and so that they're actually working together. And so for this activity, I would also make use of Google Meet Breakout Rooms, which Steve is going to be talking to you a bit more about later on. Now, if we just have a look at this activity in Google Classroom, I've set this up slightly differently. So the same as before, I have set it so that students can edit file. But the difference with this activity to the other activities is I have only assigned it to 2 students. So these are the 2 students who will be accessing this, this Jamboard to do their work. And so only those 2 students will see this. So I'm just going to assign that now. What this means is that I need to set up multiple versions of this assignment, which may sound a little bit repetitive. So I've just got a few tips for how you can make this a quicker process. First of all, make sure that you have made copies of your Jamboard the amount of times that you need it in advance. And then when you're ready to set up the second group's work, you can make use of the reuse post option. So if I just go to my computing classroom, choose the activity that I've just assigned and click reuse. And now, rather than writing the whole thing out again, all I need to do is change a few details so that it's suitable for group 2. So I'll change the title. I'm going to remove group 1's Jamboard and add a new one. So I've got one for group 2 here, because as I said, I've already made all the copies of these ready just to speed up my process. And then instead of it being to all students, I'm just going to assign that to student 3 and student 4. So the students in the groups will only see the work that is set for them specifically, but I get to see all of it. And this is also a really great way of differentiating work as well. So if I wanted to give them a slightly different activity within Jamboard, then I can do that and set that so that only those who are working on it can see it. So there are a few different ways in which you can set up Jamboard for various types of synchronous and asynchronous group work using Google Classroom and Google Meet to support this. Some other examples of what you can use Jamboard for are mind maps, coming up with ideas for projects, mood boards, things like that. It's so versatile and you can do so much with it. So before I hand over to Steve, I just also want to highlight that you can also attach other file types to classroom assignments in the same way. So if you wanted your students to collaborate on a presentation or a report, for example, then you could attach some Google Slides or a Google Doc and make that so that all students can edit and then assign it to specific students so that they can work in groups on that. But I just wanted to highlight Jamboard today because I think it's a really quick win for dotting some quick collaborative and engaging activities throughout your lessons. So thank you for watching. I'm going to hand back to Andy now, I think, for some questions.
Yeah, we're going to pick up on some questions first that have come in. Only one in so far, which is a question that came in from Belinda about assigning work in Google Classroom. And I know you talked a bit about this. And what happened here was they made an assignment and they went back to edit the assignment. And when editing assignment for the second time, they noticed that they couldn't make a copy for each student. I don't know if you've seen that before, Mia?
I have, yeah. So once you've posted the assignment, you can't go back and change that so that it makes a copy for each student. So we've seen this a few times at work, actually. And what we say to overcome that is just go back and reuse the post to make that a bit quicker. Post it again and then delete the original if you make a mistake with setting up the make a copy for each student or students can edit.
Yeah, I want to explain the amount of times that I would have clicked through that and made an error and not press make a copy for each student and then gone, oh, I'll go back through. So yeah, you're right. The reuse post route is probably, in terms of Belinda, the only way through that. Once an assignment's been put into their timeline, it's the one thing it can't do is duplicate up. So that's the only solution to that. If anyone else has any other questions, Jamboard related for Mia or Breakout Room related for Stephen, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. So we've got another slot at the end where all three of us will come back on and answer questions, but feel free to drop questions in the chat. I must admit, Jamboard, as you say, is a great tool for just getting students working together. And I'm seeing lots of schools at the moment where they've got split classes, as you talked about, where you've got some students in the classroom and some at home, and therefore you can create those pairs and collaborate that way. And also when you're working with older students, and I know you were talking through primary there, but certainly when I was working with older students at secondary school, quite frequently I would rely on them to do some of the sharing. So I might create the pairings that they're going to be working in, and then say, well, okay, you guys now create the share, you know, get the rest of your group or your partner onto this Jamboard and then start to collaborate. And that, most secondary students can work their email system to be able to do a share, and that way it saves a little bit on the work at your end. And then you can obviously ask them to share that work into Classroom by creating an assignment, which they then upload a previously created piece of work to. So don't forget, with older students, you don't necessarily have to go to the same level of setup for group work. And I would often use the time while they're working to go through and check that they could all upload to Classroom and cross-check it was all in, and that would enable me then to get that group work back in again. So lots of different ways of using Classroom with different ages of students. Mia, thank you so far. We'll see you back at the end for some Q&A. And now Stephen Hope's going to join us.
Afternoon, everybody.
Here he is to talk about using breakout rooms, both with the new enterprise feature and if you haven't got that, how you could deliver breakout rooms.
Definitely. Andy's going to be sharing my screen, or his screen, because mine's not working at the minute. Apologies. So when I say next slide, Andy's going to walk through that process. Hopefully that doesn't mean he's going to pick up loads of different pictures of different slides when I say next slide, as I've seen all over social media based on some connotations of how this can work. So yeah, I'm going to tackle breakout rooms. My name's Stephen Hope. I'm the head of independent learning for the FE colleges in the Lumen Education Group. So breakout rooms, it is going to cover enterprise, but we'll also cover how you can get around that. If you don't have the enterprise, how we can do that using some slides, and then I'll direct you to some really nice platforms, some examples, but how you can find some really nice templates of slides of how to do that rather than reinventing the wheel. So yes, next slide. Okay, so yeah, you're in Google Meet. Obviously, you go to the apps waffle or the hamburger or whatever you want to identify that as. Load up Google Meet. You now have the feature, if you have enterprise, for the free shapes for the activities option. So you want to click on that. And then you have different options. You have breakout rooms, polls, and Q&A. All of these are absolutely fantastic, but we're going to focus on the breakout room. You select the breakout room option within the free activities, and then you have the options in regards to how many rooms you actually want, depending on how many, the size of your group and the number of activities. So generally when you're doing group work activities, think about the roles that you're giving to those learners in exactly the same way as what you do in a classroom in terms of group work activity. Think about a group work and limiting the numbers within those groups, because you don't want any passengers. You want the students to be active in their learning and all playing an active role in terms of the group work. You can shuffle those in terms of the participants if you just want it random, but I'll show you some things in terms of how we start to do that. So next slide. So you can easily assign participants by dragging the names into the meeting room number that you want. So again, I'll give some examples of how you can do that as a process, whether you want that based on levels, differentiation, personalization, formings based on misconceptions or starting points of the learners. And then once you've done that, you've dragged all the names in, you then click create. Make sure, one tip is to leave yourself in the main room. You need to make sure that everybody's arrived into their breakout spaces correctly. If you move round one, you might lose somebody. That's especially for the first time, as we're doing online learning as part of the blended approach or a hybrid approach. You want to make sure they've joined correctly and you've supported them through that process, especially for our younger learners. You'll then be able to move through and see them assigned to those rooms from your screen. Next slide. So you can drag the name of the breakouts and you can also give them examples. Move around the rooms. One thing I'd say in terms of when we're creating breakout spaces is around facilitation, like you would do in a normal classroom setting with group works. You want to dip in and out. You want to ask questions. You want to coach. You want to support. And you want to drive the learning forward and make sure that learners are making progress in their learning within those breakout spaces as well. So that's enterprise. It's really simple. Go to the free shapes, go to breakout rooms, and then start to assign by drag and drop. Once all of that's finished, you can return and close all of those windows down and bring them to the main room. Enterprise is fantastic. But what happens if you don't have enterprise? You'll have access to this slide deck. Andy will link in at the end, where there's some really fantastic examples from Slide Mania. So you can create breakout rooms using a hyperdoc or slides. There's different ways that you can do this, but what I've seen really effective in my organization is creating this through slides where you've got a variety of different groups depending on the number. You've got the slide that's attached to the classroom, and within the first slide it then identifies the names of the breakout, the people in the breakouts. You can then put the meet link and the individual meet links, or create just multiple, or within a hyperlink to group A, B or C, again hyperlink the shares so they know exactly what to do. Make sure when you're setting this through a hyperdoc or a slide that you are clear in regards to what the expectations are and how to manage that process. So make sure you scaffold your learning. So within the descriptor for the assignment or the task, you are clear, especially for the first time, so students don't get confused of how to do things, and make sure you've done a dummy run and a test as you go through the process with your learners. But again, some absolutely fantastic slides on Slide Mania. So go to Slide Mania, and there's some really nice stuff where you don't have to reinvent the wheel, that you can create breakout rooms really simply from some lovely templates that apply to the context of your learning and the level of your learners as well. So I'm going to walk through some examples. We're not going to talk about exactly the specifics. We're going to talk about some big picture thinking. So some really nice examples of what I've seen is brainstorm ideas. So like you would do in a class, when you walk through the process, what I want you to do is think about giving your learners a specific question to answer or a problem to solve. So like Mia showed with on the Jamboard, you can just put a post-it note or a sticky note on there or a doc, and to support that, they can then walk through that process or just have a face-to-face brainstorming session. What we've got to think about, especially as an online forum, as part of a blended approach, is that we don't have to pigeonhole learning in exactly the same way as we would do a classroom. Instruction has a part to play, but actually what's also fantastic is where you can bring groups of students together and just get them to do some face-to-face conversations and build those communities and that peer learning as you would normally do in a classroom. So what I've seen work really, really well is, yeah, they can collaborate on a Jamboard or a Google Doc, or they can just actually form that conversation like they would normally and interact with each other. What's a great example, and I'll show a resource at the end, is when you're doing something like a brainstorm and there isn't a specific doc for them, that you ask one of those learners to make notes so you can actually see how the conversation has flowed and any key points that you might want to pick up on misconceptions as you go through the process as well. Another example is group discussions. What you want to do is schedule your sessions like you would do in a normal classroom. I don't think anybody on this call would, or anybody listening would expect to go in and just lead instruction for an hour and a half in terms of their teaching and learning in an actual classroom setting. So think about breaking up your learning to have instruction elements where students are passive, but also you've got some active learning involved in that as well, and link to your breakout rooms to do this. You would deliver instruction, you would give them some information, whether that's live through a Google Meet or whether that's pre-recorded using a screen recorder over a Google slide. And then you use the breakout rooms for the discussions around misconceptions and actually get them to have conversations and ideas around the presentation and the concept or the subject that you're delivering. Next slide, Andy. Get them to be creative. I think what we would lack by just giving instruction as we look to an online learning environment is to try and give students specific problems to solve and get them to walk through that. What I've also seen work really, really well is you give them the actual solution at the end and they have to then walk through how they would solve that or how they think might do. So a bit of a role reversal in there. Give them a time limit, put the pressure on them to start to think in terms of a project, how quickly they need to form that answer, and give them and break that down. So actually, as you start to be creative in terms of your problem solving, that students might have multiple tasks to get through. They can be then selective which tasks they pick. You can even assign point scores to those, where actually there's 5 activities to get through. And like they would do in an exam setting, that actually there's some heavy scoring that they might miss if they just focus on the first question. So get them to think about that. Using Jamboard within Meet would be really, really great for this as well, or a document or a slide. What you allow them to do is, rather than giving them a template, students can be creative in regards to how they solve the problem and how they feed back the information to that. They can add web links into that information. They can add pictures. They can add drawings and loads of different things that really brings learning to life that doesn't from a flat resource or just a conversation via a Google Meet. What we also have to factor in is building those communities and the peer element and the socialization that we get from student to student. What's fantastic is students will be getting peer feedback and having conversations around their learning throughout the session when we're in actually a classroom setting. So we need to move that to an online setting as well. You need to pair up and group students together and ensure that they can give peer feedback on projects and work that they've done. This improves their teamwork, but also allows them to focus and get better on their providing constructive feedback, that they're not just talking about the fact that somebody's done something good or bad. Why do they think that? And that's a great skill that we need to make sure that we take to an online forum. What's really important is that we differentiate in our instruction and our tasks. When we're in a classroom, we base groups of learners, pockets of learners and activities on starting points of our learners, levels, and also what they struggle on are actually flying with in regards to their learning and making progress. So we need to make sure that when we're planning breakout spaces, either using the enterprise feature in Google Meet or using a slide or a hyperdoc, that actually we think about why strategically we have placed those students into the groups that we have. Is it the fact that they have some commonality? Are you strategically grouping them together based on misconceptions of what they've done or they've learned or errors that they've made previously? Is it based on the similarity of a project that they're doing or similarities in regards to their work? And what is that process as we move through that as well? Another one is around project-based learning. This is so important. We need to make sure that students are collaborating in small groups to try and solve that problem, that actually rather than giving them the whole elephant, that we give them pieces of, and chunks of the elephant to feed off, that actually they work through the process and they manage that process and go through and it's broken down into chunks. A lot of research and evidence shows us that when students are doing online learning, don't give them the full assignment or task or activity to do. Break it down into smaller chunks that you would do in a classroom, that you can walk them through that process and actually do it around a project. This might work better at the high level, but actually can apply to primary, secondary, further education or higher education, where you're getting students to think about projects rather than subjects, that you're actually bringing an example or a passion project together, but you're using examples of maths and English and other areas and focus on topics rather than a specific subject. This works really, really nice for functional skills, maths and GCSE English, where actually students are applying the context of that learning to the context of the subject that they're learning. So that could be focusing on a maths skill that's linked to an engineering project or a science project, and how does that work? They're also building then what we call the 4 Cs in regards to collaboration on the project, the communication element online and verbally, their critical thinking, and their creativity as they walk through. And I know Mia showed some great examples of the Jamboard and how we can bring that in as we go through as well. Breakout rooms are ideal spaces for your learners to meet and move through the projects together. When you're always collective, how could you get them to do that group work if they're not broken down into smaller groups to have that conversation and take it forward? What's really nice in regards to choice board, that engagement is a challenge online. How do we ensure that students are engaged and active in their learning? So what might be really nice is actually giving the students a choice of activities of how they want to learn and what they want to learn, that they get to practice the skill or the learning around the same subject in the main room. Then you present the choices to them. So breakout room would be this, breakout 2 would be this, breakout 3, and then manage that process so that students are broken down in terms of the choices of how they want to learn and what they want to learn around the subject. This is a challenge if you've got 15 people in a group or 20 people in a group and they all want to be in the same one. Well, that's fine. If all the students make the same choice, just leave them in an open forum and don't break out the rooms into smaller sections if they all want to focus on that. What we need to think about is the process of online learning and how when we're giving students a choice, that actually they take more engagement and ownership of their learning. And at whatever level, that's what you want them to do, to find a passion and actually apply and engage and own their learning. The final thing is around a sharing session. Our students, when asked, really miss each other. They miss the interactions with their peers. If they're completely online, and I know potentially there is a lockdown coming in England, that actually, how can we give them an opportunity to give them time to chat and interact. That actually the whole schedule and their timetable for a week, learning is important, but we also need to potentially give them breakout and opportunities to share, to interact and to chat. And breakout rooms are fantastic for moving them around and to move them around in terms of those activities and with other people that they might have not participated in with previously. It works really, really well, both in the class, before and after, but also within the timetable to allow students, like I say, to just interact around their learning. You can share and you can lead this around some nice discussion starters. Sky gave a great example at the beginning in regards to what have we seen around Halloween? That can be a discussion point or hot topic. What was your favorite Halloween costume? That's what you could lead with as a starter activity. That could be the bit in between the lessons where they would normally go to the playground or a space or a canteen or an open room. Lead them through the learning and then place them into small breakout groups to then start to easily manage that process. That will give confidence to those learners that might not want to speak up in front of 20 students, especially at the beginning of the term. But actually in a group forum where there's 2 or 3 other students with them, that would be really, really helpful, and it will give them the voice and more confidence to speak up and share in a restorative way. What you can also ask from those students is to think about what would they want to learn and something that they would have to bring back. So at the beginning of those sharing sessions, maybe an aha moment where they've said, I've actually learned something, or somebody solved the problem or helped me here. And they would then bring that back and really think about why they're actually in the breakout session, why those sharing sessions happen, and just to bring that back so they're actually active, not just sitting there passively and engaging in nothing. So a couple of examples. One that I showed at the beginning is from Slides Mania. It's absolutely a brilliant resource, and there is the web link will be shared and will be on the web link that Andy shared as well onto the Canopy website. Slide Mania has got loads of templates. You can search based on education, collaboration. I just looked for breakout rooms, and this is a really nice way that, again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You take the slides, you can download them in PowerPoint or Google Slides. You can edit those, apply them to the context of your learning, change the colors if you want to. And then what you can start to do is break down that actually if you've only got 4 groups, get rid of the rest, make the boxes bigger. But again, you're not starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel when actually time is precious at the minute. Go through the process, add the number of students in, 2s, 3s, 4s, whatever you want them to do. Put the Meet link in there if you don't have the enterprise feature, and then students can start to be managed through the process. And then another great example by Shana Ramin, and again, this would be hyperlinked in the resources, that just through the process, you can give students slides around what information you want them to do before you break out. So if you don't want to use Google Meet at all, in regards to the first conversation, that you get them to pick the starter activity, you get them to access it, you allow students to the breakout room and give them the work that's assigned to them that is the same or specific and scaffold into those groups of students, and then use the slides in terms of the grid view to monitor the breakout room. So you can actually see what is happening on those slides. When students are starting to interact, you can get the students to then start to walk through the process where if they're not actually having the conversations, that they're working on a slide document and pulling all of the bits together around a breakout room that isn't face-to-face or live in regards to a video chat, that actually you can start to see conversations forming within a template on a slide presentation. Again, a really nice resource, not getting you to reinvent the wheel, that it is there and ready to go. Thank you.
Sorry for that. I was concentrating on pressing next slide. Thank you, Steve. Really great to take you through a range of different ways there of using group work. Really sort of powerful examples there. Great to see. So thanks for those, Steve. As always, some questions have come up in the chat. And now's a great time, by the way, if you have got any questions, either for me or Steve, about anything they've talked about today or the wider world of Google, feel free to drop questions in right now. So this is your warning on questions. While the questions are coming out, I was going to just talk about a little bit. One of the schools I'm working with right now has got a lot of students off at the moment. And so what they've actually done is they've paired up students. So within each sort of pairing, there's a student who's in school, who's in the classroom, and there's a student who's at home, trying to learn remotely. And for each student, and I know this took time and effort the first time, but there's a spreadsheet and the pairings are on there. There's a Google Meet link. And so then if they need to do group work or they need to that, they can just click the link and they can go on into their pairs and they can have that conversation. Just like you would say, stand in front of the class and say, go and discuss this in your pairs for 5 minutes. Then the student at home and the student at school can just then interact for that 5 minutes. So they found that useful. They also find it really useful because students in class are more likely to ask questions. When you're in the room with a teacher, you're more likely to put your hand up and say, I don't understand. And that's more difficult to do if you're at distance or you're coming through a Meet call. And so that allows them to either message their partner and say, put your hand up and ask this, or to just get that confidence in that 5-minute conversation to then have their partner put their view forward in the classroom. So thinking about how students connect from the home and school is a really important one. So if you've got the ability, I don't know, it takes time, that's another route you could go down with that, with those connections. So having sort of partners or buddies, which if you're in the same class all the time is worth doing. Some questions have come in then. I saw a question, was it from Orna earlier on? And it was a question about students. I can't remember the exact word in the question, but the question was about students being able to drop. Here's the question: is there a way to disable users from adding Jam to a Meet? So, as she's already mentioned, hosts at the moment can turn off the chat, but she wants to leave the chat on, but stop the users from dropping other files Jamboard in. I'm going to pause for Mia and Stephen. If not, I'm going to give an answer. At the moment, you can't. So at the moment, it is going to drop files in. What I would suggest with all the Google tools is to give some feedback to Google about that, because I can see, and you always, with every tool, think, oh, I could see how students could be annoying with this. Then I would suggest that what you do in any Google tool is to press the question mark or the feedback button and give some feedback to Google to say, actually, this is a pain point in terms of using the product. And obviously, a solution, the workaround is to turn chat off, but then I lose all interactivity across my whole Meet call, and I don't want to go that far. So I would certainly put that feedback in, and Google do read all the feedback that comes in around the products. And so the product team for Meet will look at that feedback. I could imagine you won't be the only person who's reported that into Google, and ultimately Google will then look at improvements to the system to filter that. So you can think about how that might work in terms of how they can improve the system that way. So that's giving feedback through to Google on that one. In terms of that turning the chat off, if you have got to turn the chat off in Google Meet, sometimes I would say to students use the Google Classroom chat area, because Google Classroom, that chat's going to remain recorded after the lesson. Because one of the downsides of using Meet chat is at the end of the call, it's like it's all gone. Somebody might have asked a great question and another student put a great answer in there. And of course, it all just disappears at the end of the call. So sometimes I will say to students, if you've got questions, pop them in Classroom. Often I've put the link in Meet in Classroom so they can use that, and then do it that way. And that would allow that chat to be recorded. So that's that question. I haven't checked whether there's any other questions just popped in. I have to look down to my right. Some questions.
From me, I think Dan Fitzpatrick has mentioned breakout rooms in terms of pulling students who might need some more support. I think that's a great mention, and not only support around their work. One example I didn't say because we focused on group work, but if you're in a live hangout and actually a student's in distress or want some support on a one-to-one, you can just create a breakout room just for that one individual, keep the rest in the main room and just support that student as you would do. That's really important in regards to the well-being of students when we're delivering an online, and if we do go to a complete lockdown and we're not delivering from the classroom at all. So that's a great example from Dan, and yeah, something I've seen.
Yeah, it is that ability to say, I'll just take you through this again and not have to take the whole class through it again. I think it is a big sort of shift, isn't it, in the ability to do that. And putting 2 people into a breakout room is so fast for enterprise users, but not impossible to create another link as well and go and do it else, separately outside of enterprise tools.
Yeah, just on that one, if anybody doesn't have enterprise, just create another Google Meet link, set it as a task or an activity, assign it to just that one learner, and just get them to go via Google Classroom, a real simple way that you can just offer a quick breakout and a catch up for some one-to-one support or small group support, again, outside of Enterprise, because I am just conscious that not everybody has Enterprise.
Great. Thanks for that, Steve. Any final closing thoughts? Another question's popped in. Any final closing thoughts from Mia or you, Steve?
Nothing from me. Thank you for watching, everyone.
And Steve?
Just keep trying. Just keep going. It's all right. We might not get it right first time, but just keep trying, and everybody's giving it a good go and try it, fail, and learn.
And of course, as I mentioned earlier, all the resources from today and all the links, so I'll get all the links together, will be on canopy.click/hybrid. So you can access this webinar recording and the slides should you want to use them yourself in your own schools or colleges for helping with staff training. And they'll be available there shortly after the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Next week, we are back again with a webinar focused on how we create interaction and how we create engagement in lessons if we're delivering in a hybrid environment. So next week, focusing on engagement. It's always great to get feedback on these webinars. So if you find this series useful, feel free to jump on the feedback form, and the link is in the chat and down below to give us some feedback. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mia. And we'll see you all soon. Take care.